Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to one and all to today's event, Azure India Community Conference 2020. Eliminate extra dependencies and state management with React hooks. This is the title of our today's session, and it might seem pretty long and complex, but let's understand it in simple terms before we actually proceed to rest of the talk. Modern web apps today are not just rendering your UI components anymore. They have a range of activities to take care from managing the app state to managing app navigations, etc. And depending on the framework or library you get to choose, sometimes you solve these things out of the box with the framework you choose for development. And sometimes you might take some extra dependencies for managing these kind of activities. Today in this session, we are here to share with you our experiences in building few behavioral components where we manage the state completely with React constructs like context, hooks, etc., thus eliminating the need for some state management libraries. With this introduction in place, I would like to welcome you all once again to today's event, Eliminate Extra Dependencies and State Management with React Hooks. Before we delve into further part of the session, I would like to introduce myself to you all. My name is Bhavna, and I work as software engineer at Microsoft. I work for Outlook team in Bangalore, where we manage the web endpoint of Outlook on mobile browsers. It's not the Android app, and it's the basically the Outlook you see when you open it on the Edge or Chrome browsers on your mobile phones. And coming to work experience, I roughly have around 4+ years of experience, mostly working on front end or UI related projects. And next, in my free time, I like cooking, so I keep experimenting with various kind of dishes from different cuisines, and have a lot of plants in my balcony, so I pretty much spend my time there. So the next in the slide is the agenda for the day. Let's see how the next 40 to 50 minutes of today's session are going to be organized. We'll begin with an introduction to one of the Microsoft toolset called Azure DevOps, which we at Microsoft in general use it to ship our awesome experiences to millions of users throughout the world. Next, we'll see what's new happening with React 16 and Evo and some recent changes which are introduced as part of it and how the code bases using React are adapting to these changes. Then we'll go briefly over a few concepts like hooks and context in React as they're required to follow the rest of our session today. Then we'll see a design pattern called Flux, which is the motivation for most of the state management libraries out there. Finally, we'll see some code examples and see different ways to manage app state and using which we'll drive over today's topic home, which is nothing but creating custom hooks in React, making it looks like Redux. Next, coming to our first topic of the day, which is nothing but Outlook and Azure DevOps. Before we actually see or understand what Azure DevOps is, let's take a step back and understand what Azure DevOps means in simple terms. DevOps is nothing but a set of tools, processes, and activities in place using which we can deliver some continuous value to our end users. And Azure DevOps is nothing but a tool set or toolkit from Microsoft, which will help us in doing these activities in a secure and reliable manner. Previously, it's called Studio Team Services, which is now being offered as Azure DevOps. We at Outlook and Microsoft in general leverage this simple tool set to manage our software development lifecycle and most of our day-to-day activities. In the next few slides, let's see what this toolset has to offer to us. At Outlook, we have roughly around 300 million plus active users, combining both our desktop and web endpoints. And more than that, we have 100 plus developers pushing some critical code changes to it every day. We have 2K plus runs per pipeline running every month, and we have releases happening every week, taking on new features, product optimizations, bug fixes, etc. to the end users. Also, there are cases where we have to roll back our bills under a minute when there is some customer escalation or issue, and we have to do all these activities in a simple and efficient manner. Can we and imagine doing these things manually? I don't think so, because it will be very tedious and error prone, and it will hamper the speed at which we operate or iterate. And these are kind of essential steps to manage any product out there, and nothing specific to Outlook in general. So Azure DevOps comes to our aid here, which will help us in automating or defining these activities so that we can iterate faster. Azure DevOps. Like we discussed earlier, DevOps is nothing but a set of tools or toolkits. We get few entities in as part of this, like boards, repos, pipelines, test plans, artifacts, wiki, etc. as part of this. Together combining all these things, these kind of things will come to our help somewhere in our software development life cycle, helping us in planning, execution, and the delivery of our product. I would like to mention something about the wiki down there, as it has helped the developers consolidate all the documentation about the product or knowledge related to product at one place, which is earlier lying in different OneNotes, Word documents, etc. And it has now become a single source of truth for all our stakeholders to refer for anything. The first one in this toolset is Azure Boards. Azure Boards help us in organizing our delivery and creating a delivery plan. This tool generally comes into our help in the planning or requirement gathering phase of our life cycle, translating the PM feature requests or specs into work items or tasks which developers usually understand. So it's natural when we begin a product feature development, we define or create the work items and tasks and organize them into some sprints, etc., and share the delivery plan with other stakeholders. These kind of activities will help us unifying all our communication needs to the partners, and also it will be a single place for us to track the progress of a feature. Additionally, Azure boards offer different views and different views like Kanban boards, etc., to carry your sprint activities, and it gives a really nice view to track the progress of your sprints, etc. So using this tool, we generally consolidate all our communication, and this is how in general, like we define the work we are doing every day in our day-to-day life. The next one in this tool set is Azure Repos. At Outlook, we use Azure Git Repos for our source code management. Don't worry, this is the same regular Git which you get when you install it on your local machines, nothing fancy or Microsoft customization here. We use the same pull request to merge our code to master from our feature branches, and we use command line tools, etc., and the IDE shortcuts for the same. The most important thing which I would like to talk here is branch policies and validations, which we can configure using Azure Repos. For example, you can configure simple rules like enforcing some minimum reviewers, ensuring that a work item is linked to your PR, and these kind of simple things will help us a lot from adding some extra eyes on your code changes or things coming into master, and also linking a work item will help us in better traceability of the changes. So whenever we want to refer back to the history of the code, we can just go to the linked work item, etc., and we can actually understand why we had done the particular change. So at Outlook, we have enforced these kind of simple rules, which will help us ensuring in better quality and improved traceability. Additionally, we can configure some build validation steps on your PRs using things called pipelines, which we'll discuss later in this slide. And as part of that, you can do a range of activities or customizations which you want to do depending on your code base. For example, ours is a front end or UI heavy code base, so we have some simple build validation steps in place like deploy link generation, bundle size change detection, etc. I'll talk briefly about what these are. For the first one is the deploy link generation. Generally, when we raise PRs, there are some changes which will go through it, and if we want to validate the changes, the general practice is maybe you will be pulling the branch onto your local machine and doing your build process, whatever it is, and then verifying the change. Instead of that, we have automated this process, and we'll generate things, a few links called deploy links on our PRs, which will basically push the assets or artifacts on as part of the build on your PR to Azure Blob Storage. Later, our front-end web server is intelligent enough whenever we add a query parameter to pick the resources from this place instead of the target environments, thus giving us ready-made links or way to track the changes which are going in the part of PR. Additionally, we have a bundle size change detection bot. Uh, the reason being, generally boot modules or boot bundles are very critical to our boot bundles are very critical to our app performance, and any changes in the sizes of it might adversely affect our app load time or initial performance. So we have integrated bundle size change detection bots, which will immediately alert us with when any major change happens in our boot module size. Additionally, we have integrated with a third-party tool called Screener, and which will catch any UI regressions that happens as part of our PRs. So all these kind of activities will just add some extra checks, and this will help us improving our code quality further. You with Azure reports, and depending on the code bases you have, you can configure a range of activities, and these are just some of few examples which you can do if yours is a front-end code. So the next one in the slide is Azure Pipelines. Azure Pipelines are nothing but a cloud-hosted orchestration process which is provided to you through which you can automate some few of the repeated activities. It can be your testing, it can be your build process, it can be your app release, etc. And you can use Azure Pipelines to automate these kind of processes. For example, at Outlook, our pipelines are complex combinations of tasks containing yarn, gulp, and partial scripts. And behind the scenes, you define a pipeline using set of tasks which will run on an agent. So these agents are nothing but some virtual machines which are procured depending on the type of task. For example, if it's yours is an NPM task, it will come with, you will procure an agent which has all the node and all the environment setup. So yeah, you can highly customize these agents which you select, and in case if the custom agents are not helping you, you can you can create your own agents with predefined softwares, etc., and you can configure your pipelines to use them. Of all the different kind of pipelines that are possible, a few important things I would like to talk are the build and release pipelines, as they help us in continuous integration and delivery of our product. So build pipelines are nothing but the things which will orchestrate your resource generation, which are needed for your app to run. So as soon as you merge into master, you might want to extract the artifact or resources using which you can release your app to production. So build pipelines are generally the ones which enable the continuous integration of your product. So using these services, you can generate the artifacts, and these artifacts can be the input to your release pipelines, which will take them to further environments. Additionally, these are the artifacts which you can share with the external team using something called Azure Artifacts, which we'll discuss in the next slide. The next one in this list is the release pipelines, which basically automates your release of your app to different environments. Using release pipelines, you can configure some extra checks or gates or pre-deployment approvals, using which you have some fine-grained control on how you want to release your app. Generally, once a build or a resource is created, generally don't want to release immediately to the end users. You might want to release it in a staged manner so that you can catch any regressions or issues earlier in the phase and stop the rollout or abandon the build as such to the so that the end user won't see that issue. Using release pipelines, all this orchestration is very simple and easy, through which you can have a greater control on how you want to release your app. The next one is Azure Artifacts. Artifacts are nothing but some proxies or feeds through which you can share your code or consume the code from external resources. In general, whenever you write the code, you want it's natural that you might want to share them to other users, and at the same time, you might want to consume it from some external libraries. And Azure Artifacts are perfect for this in enabling us in this code sharing, and these will nicely integrate with our build pipeline. In the previous slide, we have seen that build pipelines will create the resources which can be shared with end users, and this Azure artifacts could be one of the output of your build pipeline. Also, this can be considered as a proxy for actual npm sources or something like that, so that you have finer control on what version of the external package you are consuming. Suppose if you are consuming directly from the external repository or the resource, you might not have a greater control on when that app updates. Using Azure Artifacts, you can keep a copy of that third party library which you want to consume, and it's up to you when you want to delete or update or consume it. So, in short, these artifacts are nothing but proxies which will help you consume the code in a secure manner. For example, at Outlook, we have two important feeds for us, which are nothing but OVA NPM, which is the internal feed for all our front-end packages, and OVA NuGet, which is the feed for all our backend or server packages. Using these two Azure feeds, we are today able to share our reusable code with our partner teams. Now that we have seen how we manage our code base and our daily activities at Outlook using Azure DevOps, let's proceed to our next topic, React 16 and above, and what's new. Like the saying goes, change is only constant, and we have to adapt to it. And this happens to be true for React as well. Over the years, has been going through multiple changes, and particularly with React 16 and above, there are some critical changes it has gone through internally and externally, due to which all the apps or code bases using React are highly changing the way they write the code today. In the next few slides, let's see what are those new features in React which are heavily influencing our code base styles today. The first and the foremost being a paradigm shift to use functional components over class. Prior to React 16, the only way to define your UI components is to write a class component by extending the React.component class, and that's pretty much how we used to do. And for now, someone coming from an object-oriented background, this might seem totally natural and fine, but you can actually simplify it much further. Let's see how it is by using a simple example. Imagine we have to write a chat component wherein when it mounts or changes some value in it, we have to register the user for receiving some notifications, and on unmount, you need to unsubscribe or unregister the user. A class component for the same would pretty much look like this, and if you observe it carefully, all the logic is pretty much spread across all your lifecycle methods, and it is highly it's high there is a lot of duplicate code here. Let's see how the functional equivalent of this now looks like. This is how it is in simple terms, and you can see the first immediate observation could be there is almost 50% reduction in the number of lines of code. This is one of the prime reason for moving to functional components because it consolidates the logic or things we are doing along different life cycles, which are usually some duplicate work into one place. If you see, we have reimagined our lifecycle methods as an effect, and we'll register the user whenever the props data change and unregister the user as an unknown as part of the use effect hook. This is as simple as it, and it had made your code look much cleaner and clutter free now. This is one of the prime reason, and there is a major push to write your components as functional components, and along with some recent introduction like use effect and use state hooks, etc. There is a major push these days. The next one in the list is error boundaries. How do we generally handle a runtime exception in any language? In general, it's using the try catch block, right? Let's see how do we catch the runtime? How do we handle the runtime exceptions that happen during rendering of React components? If we continuing to your previous example of the chart component, let's imagine we are accessing some undefined data during our render process, and let's see what happens if we run this code. It will throw some cryptic error saying it can't read the property username of undefined. These are the kind of things which can happen unintentionally due to some inconsistencies in data written by APIs, etc. And these pretty much happen. These keep happening during rendering of your app. So how do we handle this? If we have to if we have to go by the traditional way, we have to wrap the parts of the code that is prone to exception in the try catch block, so, which is something like this. So once we keep it as in try catch block, now you won't be displaying this error to the end user, and also at the same time you will be showing a blank screen because we are returning null in this component. So so in the next slide, let's see with error boundaries how we can handle these things. With error boundaries introduced in React now, any component or any class which has this special lifecycle method called component did catch can act as an error boundary. Usually, we wrap these kind of HOCs at somewhere top level of your componentry so that any error or exception happening further down your child components can be caught by this, and you can show a or alternate experience, providing much better user experience instead of showing the cryptic errors or blank screens to the end users. So this is how a simple HOC for error boundary could look like, and depending on whether there is an issue had occurred or not, you can just uh, switch the component with an error message. Now you can wrap your chart component at top level under this error boundary so that when the issue occurs, instead of showing a blank screen, you can show the error message. This might look very simple in this example, but what this does is it eliminates thousands of unnecessary try catch, which will that might lie in all our components if we haven't wrapped with error boundaries. So the next one in our slide is the React lazy and suspense. Code splitting is the natural or the default option for us to optimize any boot bundle sizes. And this is generally achieved by using dynamic imports in JavaScript. But this might be straightforward for JavaScript regular modules or functions. But in context of components, React components in specific, we might need to do some extra logic for doing this. Let's take an example to understand this in detail. Imagine we have two components, component A and component B, and we want to take a dynamic or runtime dependency of component B. Without using lazy or suspense, our code looks something like this. So initially, we will just show a loading wrapper, and when this actual component A mounts on its did mount method, we will try to load this B component dynamically, and when this promise resolves, we'll set this value in the state so that our component A re-renders and finally displaying it. This kind of lazy loading will eliminate the need for including B in our boot bundle sizes, and this is a default option which anyone does for some boot optimizations. So if we see now, there are few problems with it. First of all, we are not handling this load of the component B gracefully. Imagine if there is some error in loading this, we will continuously keep on showing the loading error, and there is no display of some message to the end user. And also, if we observe, this is not at all scalable. Imagine there are more components in EA like C, D, etc., which needs to be loaded lazily. Our state keeps on extending to do this and to accommodate this kind of request. So let's see how this translates with the React Lazy and Suspense. With the use of React Lazy and Suspense HOCs now, you can wrap your dynamic import with the React.lazy, which will return you a promise, and you can wrap this lazy component inside a Suspense HOC so that it will show the fallback UI until you will fetch this component. Uh, if we see, this code is now much simplified and it's more declarative, and it takes it closer the React way. With By adapting to React Lazy and Suspense, now it is almost easy to dynamically load your code, and the code bases are heavily using this these days. The next one is the React hooks. Nevertheless, to say this is the most celebrated feature addition to React, and which made the transition from the class components to functional components possible. Prior to introduction of hooks, we were able to write only stateless components as functional components, but with introduction of hooks and all the different kind of standard hooks React has now provided, you can almost write any component as a functional component. We'll discuss more about hooks in the later slides. So these are few things to name, and there are many more new other features which are being introduced as part of React 16. But these are some things that are highly influencing the way we write the code today. If we observe, the more important reason why we discuss these are some of the new features in React which have helped us to rethink the way we write the code, and also understand if we can eliminate some extra dependencies for lazy loading, error handling, etc. I'm pretty much sure prior to this, every might have been using some famous library called React Loadable for lazy loading your components. But now, since React has started providing the first-hand support, you can now just deal it with React. So, by carefully observing and understanding the changes and rethinking the way we write our app, we could eliminate some of these third-party libraries for managing some of the functions in our web app. So, in the rest of our today's session, we will see how we can do the state management in React apps along with the constructs like hooks and context. The next one is hooks and context in React. I'm pretty much sure someone using React from quite some time today are familiar with these two, but I promise you that don't worry, this won't be another intro to hooks course, and we'll just go through a brief overview for the benefit of any newcomers to our session today. So, what are hooks in React? Hooks are nothing but plain JavaScript functions that lets you manage your component state and side effect. If we have observed in our previous example, we have seen how we have reimagined our lifecycle methods of component dit mount and update as effects, and we have written our functional components. The hooks are these are some of the standard hooks which React has provided today, using which we can conveniently manage this state and the effects side effects effectively. There are only two simple rules if we have to use this React hooks today. The first and the foremost being these hooks are allowed to be called only inside your functional components, and they should not be called inside the nested conditions or for loops, etc. Any JavaScript function which adheres or follows these two things can be qualified as a hook. And for the sake of simplicity, we reserve any function which we want to behave it as a hook. We will prefix it with the keyword use so that we'll understand it's a hook function. And there are TS-lins or ES-lint rules available there, which will help us making sure that these hook functions are not called inside any other regular functions. Uh, of all these available hooks today, the ones which are important to us are use state, you or use reducer and use context. We'll discuss in the later part of the slide how we use this hooks to effectively manage the state of our app. Uh, Also, hooks would help us to abstract some commonly performed activities so that we can avoid some repetitive code or errors. For example, if we understand the use effect hook correctly, the use effect takes a parameter called dependency array, which will define when the effect has to run. It is a common practice to reimagine our component did mount in class components as a use effect with an empty dependency. But it is natural for any new developer or someone to forget this dependency array, thus totally changing the meaning of how this effect hook runs. A missing dependency array means the effect now runs on every change, and it might cause some unnecessary effects of running the functions which you actually intend to run on the mount of your app. So these are some kind of common things which you might be doing across different components in your components, and you can write some custom hooks to abstract this process, thus making your code look much simpler. For example, we have some custom hooks like component did mount or unmount or use window dimensions, thus helping us standardizing the way we write our code. The next one in the topic is React context. Let's see what React Docs has to say about this. It says context provides a way to pass data to the component tree without having to pass props down manually at every level. Like we know, every component has access to only two kinds of data: the props it receives from its parents and its internal state. Uh, for example, if any component requires a value from a few of its grandparents level, one way to access this data is to pass these props all the way until that component. The other way to avoid this prop drilling is to use a React context. You can imagine React context as something like a global object using which you can avoid this prop drilling. Let's see with an example how we can use the context effectively in three simple steps. The first and the foremost one is to create a context object using the create context function, and then wrap it around the child components where you would like to access this value. The third step is to use this global context in the child component where you want to access this value using the use context hook which we discussed earlier, so that you can read the required value. Using this way, now you need not pass this context values required by this child component all the way throughout the components. This might seem pretty straightforward, but in general, if you imagine, there might be some properties which are global to your app, like theme, user, local, etc. And you don't want to actually pass these values to each and every component and just make it look redundant. So you can effectively use context for these kind of global properties across your app, so that any component which wants to read it value can simply wrap it with a use context hook, and thus avoid your prop drilling. In the next few slides, we will see how using these two simple concepts of hooks and context, and we can create a powerful pattern and of managing the state in our apps. Before we actually proceed to and understand what this pattern is, let's take a pause and understand why we should use this in first place. The first and the foremost being reducing the dependencies on your app. It is generally common that whenever we start a project or a product in React, we compare different state management libraries out there and choose one depending on our needs and requirement. Now, this is fine as long as that code is sitting in your code base, but as soon as you try to integrate with any of your partner teams, you might face some issues there, as they might be reluctant of this extra dependencies, indirect extra dependencies coming by consuming your component. We can avoid these kind of back and forths if we try to deal the state in the pure React way, and thus eliminating some extra dependencies on your app. As the saying goes, lesser the luggage, more the comfort, lesser your dependencies, more easier your partner integrations. The second one being the learning curve and saving time for newcomers. Generally, the way we write the code and manage the state highly depends on the library we choose. For example, I am a MobX heavy person, and there are some minute differences in terminologies and things between a MobX and the Redux managed app. And whenever I come across any Redux apps, I take a pause for some mental mapping. So we can and again, this kind of activity keeps on happening whenever you change from library to library. So if instead of doing this, if we happen to manage your state with the pure React way, you can save some of the learning time for newcomers, so that they need not understand any other extra concepts. The next one in our slide is a flux paradigm. Flux is nothing but a design pattern which enforces unidirectional flow for data change requests. A typical flux flow looks something like this. It will start with an action, letting the entities know what kind of state update it needs, and a dispatcher listening to this. The dispatcher has the knowledge of what to do when it receives an action, and how to update the store, and as a result, and it will update the value whenever it receives an action. Once the store value gets updated, a notification is sent to the view, and as a result, the view reacts to these changes, finally displaying the updated value. This is a typical flow of the data change in if we have to follow the flux pattern, uh, and any other state management library is basically abstracting us all these concepts. And so in our next few slides, let's see if there is any other way we can implement this flux flow with all the concepts we have learned, like context, hooks, etc., and see how we can manage the state of our apps. In the next few slides, I'll be taking you through the very famous to-do example, which you might be seeing in all the tutorials out there when learning any state management libraries, and we'll see different ways how we can manage the state of a to-do app with just React constructs. In, in our to-do example here, our aim is to create a simple app which looks something like this. It will have an input box followed by a button, clicking on which should update the list below it with the value present in the input. Let's see how we would write if we have to write a pure functional component without using any other libraries. This is as simple as it, right? There will be a top level component called to do, which is abstracting or encapsulating all the child components like add button and the to do this, and it is managing the app state using the use reducer hook, which basically outputs it a list of to dos and a function called dispatch, which will help to update this value. This is as simple as this, and you can now pass all these handlers to the child components so that they can do their functions. This looks as simple as it, right? But if we observe carefully, there are few things or extra overhead which I can observe here. The first and the foremost being the callbacks being passed to the child component. If In this case, it's not very obvious or straightforward because the add button happened to be an immediate child of a to-do app. But imagine if this button happened to be somewhere in the third or fourth level of this to-do component. We would have to pass this function as a prop to all these components in the way. This is indirectly leading to the prop drilling, which we have discussed in one of the previous slides. And in the next slide, let's see how we can avoid this. Like we have discussed before, context comes to our help whenever we have to avoid the prop drilling, and this is how we have improvised our previous version. Now we just created to do context, which basically will hold the list of to dos, and we no longer pass the callbacks or the values to the child components, as they can now simply access the required values using the use context hook. This is as simple as this, and now our the overhead of extra callbacks is solved. But there is one issue we have to observe here, and in our attempt to solve the problem of prop drilling, we have landed us into another trouble. Let's see what it is. If we observe carefully, whenever a to-do gets updated here, our to-do app renders, and as a reaction to it, this whole component re-renders, creating a new value for this context here. And by the very nature of the context, very nature of how the context works, whenever the value in the context changes, all the consumers using this value will re-render, which is an unnecessary overhead in this case. If we observe, we have two child components, add button and to-do list, depending on this context. And whenever the to-do value get updated, both these components re-render. In reality, the re-render of an add button is an extra overhead for us, because there is no reason, there is no value changing in it, and this is just an unnecessary overhead. In our next example, let's see how we can solve this problem. So finally, this is how we solve this. What we did is we have now separated the to-do and dispatch context here, so that add button and to-do list are no longer dependent on the same value. Now our And also we did one more thing by wrapping, that is wrapping our add button as a memo component. Now whenever the to-do gets updated and the to-do component re-renders, it is just the to-do list which get re-rendered, because the value of to-dos changes, and add button doesn't get rendered, because now it's a memo component, and its prop didn't change and its context value didn't change. So now we are in our final state of managing our whole app with just React, and we have solved all our problem of prop drilling, re-renders, and etc. So this is what it is in three simple steps, and let's see further how we can improvise this further. So just having a quick recap of what we did in the previous three slides, we just obtained an observable state, possibly through a new state or user hooks and the dispatch function associated to it. And then we have used a top level context to share this value to child components to avoid the problem of prop drilling. That's it. These are the two simple things which we can do, thus avoiding uh, that's it. These are the two simple things using which you can manage your app state totally now. And using this similar ideology in repetition through smaller parts of your apps and independently, now you can totally manage your app state. Here is a small problem. If we The moment you start using this pattern repeatedly in throughout your app, you will be doing one action in common. You will be creating the context objects, etc., which we discussed in the previous slide again and again. And also, if we see our previous example, there is a lot of state interaction logic sitting together with our UI component code. In this case, our add button is having the code for update what should happen on click of add, and it has all the logic interacting with state management as our view. This feels like a tightly coupled code, and as soon as more and more actions are added to our app, the component just gets extended. So let's see in our next few slides how we can write some hooks to solve both of these problems. So the first one in our custom hook library is a provider HOC component. What this component does for us is it abstracts the process of the context creation for the state and dispatch. Now, as a consumer, we just have to wrap our components using the provider HOC and passing its required values of state and dispatch, and the context creation part is internally taken care. The next one in our library are a set of hooks. we discussed before, we can use concept of custom hooks to abstract some commonly performed tasks, and we are exactly doing the same here. These the hooks which we create here are used as decorators to some functions which actually want to interact with the state. The first one in our list is a use create store hook. This is as simple as a wrapper on our use reducer. I just like made it so that it looks similar to the create store in Redux. We can totally eliminate and use reducer directly here or rename it. And the next one in our list is a use action hook. This hook acts as a decorator to the functions, which basically dispatches the actions or the state updates. And this binds the dispatch function in our dispatch context to the actual decorate to the decorated functions. The next hook in our library is a use selector hook. This hook basically decorates the functions which requires access to the values in our state context. Uh, that's it. These are the three simple, with these three simple hooks and the some other HOC context, this is how our reducer library looks now. In the next slide, let's see how we using this library can now simplify our code much further. So now this is how the final version of our to-do app looks like. We have now moved all our state interaction logic out to a separate folder called data, and we have separated the functions based on the kind of interactions they do. Now our view components are just as simple as this, where our the root to-do component will wrap the add button and to-do list in a provider, passing its the required values from the use reducer hook. Now the logic for adding the to do is moved out to the data folder into an add to do function, and we just simply decorate it with an use action function which will actually bind the dispatch to it. Now this looks much cleaner right now. As more and more actions get added to your app, you can just create new functions or files here, and in your view component you can just decorate those functions with your use action hook. This makes our code look much simpler and cleaner. And finally, we are in a state to manage our app state with just React. Okay, we have discussed a lot, right? We have seen how to manage the state with React, and we have written a lot of custom hooks, and we have seen what this pattern is. Now let's see how do we map all of this to the Flux pattern, which we discussed in the beginning of our session. Now we can imagine the actions of the flux as the use action or the async action hooks, which usually decorate the functions dispatching the actions. Your dispatcher is nothing but the dispatch or set state function you get from the use state or the use reducer hooks, which along with the reducer function will now have the knowledge of how to update the state values. Finally, you will have your store, which is being stored in your provider HOC component, which internally stores the value in a context. And finally, your view just remains the same by reacting whenever the value in the context changes. That's it. By using the simple concept of hooks and context, we are in a state now to manage our app state with pure React, and we have written some custom hooks to abstract some repeated processes. So far, so good. It feels really great to manage everything with React, and we have seen a lot of code examples. But there are some caveats here which we should be careful about, and we'll see what they are in the next few slides. The responsibility to maintain immutability of state lies on us. In our previous to-do example, our app state is very simple, which is nothing but a plain array of to-dos. Let's see with the addition of requirement and how our app state changes now. Now our app has to handle reminders as well, and the state is now transformed into a nested object like this, which is having an list of to-dos and list of reminders as well. Now our reducer function transforms like this, which now has an additional switch case to perform and to update the list of reminders whenever an add reminder action is received. But do you think it's correct? I don't think so. Had this been a Redux reducer, it would have thrown some error, something saying like some state change has observed during dispatch. Uh, with by not by by taking the decision of not using state management libraries, the responsibility of maintaining a reducer function as a pure function now lies with us. The reason for this being, with the concurrent release coming in place for React, next versions of React, it is very much possible that your render cycle of the app might trigger multiple times before it is actually pushed to the changes are pushed to your browser. So to make sure that you don't have any unnecessary side effects, it is important that your reducer functions are pure functions so that you don't see any duplicate values irrespective of number of times your reducer function runs. In essence, all of this is saying that make sure your reducer functions of pure and your state is immutable. So to solve this, what we have to do is we need to perform a deep copy of our state object either by using nested spread operators or using a Lodash utility like clonedid, thus making sure that we don't mutate the incoming state. This is one of the caveat which you should be careful about when writing the reducers for use reducer hook. The next one is the detection and avoiding unnecessary re-renders. In our previous example of version 2 of to-do example, we have seen how our add button has unnecessarily re-rendered when our list of to-dos have is updated. To solve this, we have split the state into two contexts so that now add button doesn't re-render. However, uh, there could be still possibility of undetected re-renders happening by the very virtue of how our reducers work. In our previous example, in our attempt to solve the problem of immutability, we have done a deep clone of deep copy of our state object. Now our view for the updated to-do app will look like this, and both the reminder list and the to-do list are the consumers of the same context object, which is nothing but this one. In our attempt to maintain the immutability, we are now creating a new copy of to-dos or reminders whenever whenever either of them updates. So, and as a result of it, even though it's only the to-dos which got updated, the reminder list will re-render and vice versa. The only way to avoid these kind of undetected re-renders is to carefully design your context so that all the consumers listening to a particular context are related components, and it makes absolute sense for them to re-render when the values in that context updates. The last one in this is the restoring the state value on successive mounts. Like if we observe carefully, our state value is residing in the context object in our provider HOC. And the lifetime of this value is only as long as your component is mounted. Once it gets unmounted, the value get lost, and you need to start fresh whenever this component mounts again. This is generally not something we would actually want for apps like to-dos, and there should be ways we have to solve it. One way to solve it is to take a backup of the value when the component unmounts and store it in a global window level object and restore its value whenever the component remounts again. These are some of the caveats or issues which we should be careful when we decide to write our apps using context and hooks. Now we have discussed a lot, and I am sure all of you might have been thinking, is there any place where this pattern has been used? So let's see all of these things working in action. At Outlook, we are in process of rewriting or reimagining our web endpoint, and in this process, we have rewritten one of our module called contacts module, which is almost similar to our to-do example. It's a near static list wherein we fetch a list of contacts and display them, and the updates or deletions or any other kind of updates on this are very less. So, in our attempt to reimagine or rewrite this app, we have leveraged the simple concepts whatever we have discussed, and we have used this in production today. This is a live example where we have leveraged this pattern, and all the learnings and caveats which we have seen before are the ones from our experience. Finally, we are nearing to the end of our session, and let's summarize all our discussion by summing up and understanding when it is beneficial to use this and when it is not. The first one is if the smaller components of the app where you see the need to share them. Generally, you might be building some behavioral components like contact cards in our previous example or some registration forms which have a high frequency or tendency for them to share across your partner teams. So it is advisable to use this pattern for some smaller behavioral components such that so that you can avoid any you can ease your partner integrations. The second one is when your components are not update heavy. Like we discussed in one of your caveats, as there are more and more updates happening on your app, there is high possibility and chance that you might land yourself into unnecessary re-renders, which will adversely cause a hit on your app's performance. So it is beneficial and advised to use this pattern when your components are not update heavy. Finally, you can use this in single page applications like our To-Do app, where you can get rid of some state management libraries by doing it the pure React way. Finally, when not to use this. If you're already familiar and using some other state management library, it's totally perfect and there is no need to rewrite or rewrite using this pattern. For medium to large scale apps, your requirements may just get complex in shorter span of time, and you might land yourself into some performance problems due to undetected re-renders and state immutabilities, etc. We discussed before. So in that case, it's better you use some state management libraries which will solve all these problems for you out of the box. So that's it for most of the part today, and these are some of the references which we have used in preparing the content for the talk. You can go through the detailed examples present in the code sandbox for the to-do examples we have discussed, and you can feel free to reach me for any other further clarifications or questions. Finally, thank you one and all for attending today's session. I hope you found it really helpful. Thank you.